Hello, we will be starting in another minute or so. I'm just finishing up some preparation. So we'll be starting in another minute or so to allow people to join. Everyone, welcome to this new webinar for learning Python from scratch. If you haven't already seen them, there have been two previous webinars, which both of them are on YouTube. These webinars will no longer be live streamed onto YouTube just because we saw the quality wasn't great, and live streaming on Facebook doesn't really work for some reason. So that being said, this webinar will be available on YouTube afterwards as a video. Around 2 hours afterwards, we will probably have it up by then. So yes, I do also have the chat open, so if you do have any questions, leave them as a message on the chat, and I will be able to eventually read them whenever I glimpse over at the chat. Let me load up the work for today. There it is. There it is. Cool. So today is going to be another important day in order to get your basics in Python sorted. So if you haven't already seen it, the first lesson we did was to cover how to print stuff in Python. So if I start sharing my screen, it will probably be better. Desktop. Okay. Cool, here we go. Let's just minimize this. Cool. So yes, the first webinar we had, which was on Sunday now, I think. Today is Tuesday. Yep, so on Sunday we had our first webinar, which is all about how to print stuff in Python, which was basically the building blocks on any program you'll build. You'll probably need to use the print function a lot. That being said, that was the complete basic. So the first lesson we looked at that. We also touched upon variables. We'll be doing a lot more work on variables today. And yesterday's webinar, we explored an important concept in programming, which is data types. What different data types are, and just having a rough idea of that will help you out a lot today. That being said, I don't think there's anything else that I can remember at the top of my head to catch up on. So let's dive straight into the things that I have planned for today. So the first thing I have planned for today is showing how we could play around with these data types we learned in yesterday's webinar. Again, if you haven't seen it, it should be a video on YouTube on the SB Components YouTube channel. The full webinar should be up, so if you don't understand anything I'm about to say, just go rewatch that, and then it should all make sense. So we will be looking at how to manipulate different data types, and the big thing today is how to get information from the user. So the first session we looked at how to give information to the user, how to present information to the user, which is fairly straightforward using the print command function, and then just typing whatever you want to tell the user. So hello, let's say we want to tell the user hello, you could run our script, okay, and there we go, we printed hello to the user. This is all good. We obviously now know how to give information to the user. Now we need to learn how to take information from the user. And in order to understand that, we need to understand two fundamental things in Python, which are variables and the input command. So before we look at the input command, let's go over what variables are and how to use them. So in the first session, I did show you an example for a variable and kind of did also try to explain how to think of variables. So if you don't remember, you should always think of variables as a box that kind of has a copier and a shredder attached to it. We'll look at why it has a copier and shredder attached to it, but just think of it like that. Now, in order to create a variable in Python, it's super easy. You just need to, and also these boxes also have labels on them. So in order to create a variable in Python, you just need to type out what you want the variable to be called. So in this case, if I want a variable name, called name, so a variable is just, like more serious computer science terms. Um, no voice. Can you not hear me? My microphone should be on. Let's see. I am saying no. My microphone is connected. Um, are you sure you can't hear me? And yeah, it's not live streaming on YouTube because the quality wasn't good. But can you not hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? It is recording. Let me just type it into chat to see. Can you hear me? Hello? There are 2 people watching, so if any one of you can hear me, should be fine. There's no point in continuing if... Nope, okay. 1 second, let's see if I could fix this. Okay, so Richmond is saying he can hear me. So maybe just check your speakers or headphones if it's not working for you. Cool. So just check it. One person could hear me, so hopefully, maybe in the recording, it should also be working. I just asked someone I know to quickly hop on and let me know if they could hear me. So I will continue for now. I'm just going to quickly type in chat then. If you can't hear me, just either try fixing it on your side or watch it after on YouTube. Cool. So if you can see the screen, hopefully you saw the message. Hopefully my mic is still on. Yep, my mic is still on. And we will continue then. So as I was saying, in order to make a variable in Python, all you need to do is just give it a name, whether that be, give it a label, whether that be name, age, whatever. Cool. So I just got notified that my mic is working for other people. So let's full steam ahead then. Yeah, so in Python, in order to make a variable, all you need to do is give it a label, age, name. And when you give it a label, you also need to give it some sort of value. Now, you can set it to, no, it's other programming languages. You can set it to none, which basically means there's nothing in this box. There's no value in this box. Or you could set it to my font size. File, edit. How can I make this bigger? Let's see. Window, help. Does that work? I mean, I feel like that's a bit too big. Let's go for like 16. That should be better, right? If you wanted to increase font size. I'm going to leave it at that for now. If you still can't see it, let me know. But yes, as I was saying, in order to, where was I saying? Oh yeah, so with variables, you have to give it a value. So for now, let's just give it the value, my name, Amrit. I can't spell my name, Amrit. Age, Obviously, age is a number, so we could always give it a number value. In numbers in Python, you just type them out. So I'm 20, so you just type in 20. Strings, you use quotation marks to surround them. That tells Python that this is just a block of text, and that's a data type. So if you need to catch up on data types, just rewatch yesterday's webinar. Cool. So that's so far that's all we've seen what to do with variables. Variables are just storage locations that are supposed to store some sort of value. All we have looked at is creating variables and putting something into them. There's a lot more you could do with variables, and let's kind of get into that now. I'm going to make a quick program, and I want you to mentally think what this program is going to end up doing. So let's create 3 variables, A, B, and C. You shouldn't create variables like this. You should create them one at a time so you make sure you don't make any mistakes. But for now, let's just create 3 variables. And I'm going to assign them values 1, 2, and 3. Now, Python doesn't really care about spaces. This is perfectly valid. I'm just using spaces so it's more clear for you to understand. So 3 variables, A, B, and C, and they hold values 1, 2, and 3. Now I'm going to play around with these variables, and all I'm going to do is say A is equal to B, B is equal to C, B is equal to C, and C is equal to A. Fairly straightforward, and what we're going to do then is print A, B, C. This should work. There we go. Actually, I shouldn't have pressed run yet, but the output we got is 2, 3, 3. Now let's kind of understand what's going on here and why we got 2, 3, 2, not 2, 3, 3. We got 2, 3, 2. Now let's kind of understand why we got this and what's going on. Now, as I said earlier, you have to imagine that these variables have like copy machines attached to them and shredders attached to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a whiteboard, and I'm just going to leave it here. Yep, it doesn't go full screen, because I'm going to show you a technique in computer science that we use to use a method we call trace tables to kind of go through and understand what the program is actually doing. So the way trace tables it depends from like teacher to teacher how they teach it. I've learned a few different ways on how trace tables works, and I'm just going to be showing you my favorite way of doing trace tables and the way it works best for me. So the entire idea of trace tables is just to trace or to understand what value variables are at a given time. So the way you create a trace table is you list all the variables you have. In this case, we only have 3 variables, A, B, and C. So we list them out going horizontally, so going from left to right. So we just write A, B, and C. Now you just kind of create a table, and that's your initial trace table done. Now whenever a variable changes value, you write it out underneath here. And if it ever changes value, you cross it out. So that's the basis of how trace tables work. Let's actually go through it. Do keep in mind, unless, I don't know if we will cover this later on, but programs do execute code line by line. There is a way that it doesn't execute it line by line, but we won't necessarily get into that anytime soon. But programs do execute code line by line. So it executes this line first, then this line, then this line, then this line. There's nothing on this line, so it just skips it. Then this line, then this line, then this line, then this line. So programs execute code line by line. So let's go line by line and see what values of A, B, and C are as we go along. So the first line we execute is A is equal to 1. So we type in 1 over here. Next line, B is equal to 2. So we write in 2 there. Next line, C is equal to 3. So far, these are the values stored inside our variables. By the way, if we had strings, so let's say we had A, B, C, D in one of the variables, then over here would you write exactly this in quotation marks A, B, C, D. Otherwise, we just write numbers. Now we jump to this line, A is equal to B. Now what happens in when you do A is equal to B, you're not transferring what's inside of B to A, you're making a copy of what's in B and putting that into A. So you kind of need to understand that. So when we do A is equal to B, we're not moving what's in B to A, we're making a copy of it and moving that. So what we're doing now is we're making a copy of 2 and we're putting it into A. So this is what I mean by every variable has like a copier and a shredder built into it. The copier copies whatever is in the box, and the shredder destroys whatever in the box. So if we were to do a step-by-step process of what A is equal to B is, first, variable A deletes whatever is within it because we're assigning something new into it. Then variable B creates a copy of 2 and then moves that over. So the copier just created a copy of variable 2, moves that over, and there we go, we executed that line. A is equal to B. So now A has a value 2 in it, and B still has the value 2 in it. So do always remember, when you do something like that, A is equal to B, or name is equal to whatever, another name, like name 1 is equal to name 2, whatever your variables are called. If one variable is equal to another variable, that doesn't mean you're moving over whatever is information in that variable. It means you're making a copy of that information and moving that over. So in this case, we made a copy of 2, we made a second 2, and moved that 2 over. Now we move to the next line, B is equal to C. So the same thing happens again, B deletes whatever is inside of it. We make a copy of whatever is in C, in this case 3, and we move that over. So now this is 3. Now the last line is C is equal to A. Exact same thing happens, C deletes whatever is inside it, the shredder shreds whatever is inside C. We make a copy of whatever is in A, there's 2 in A, and we move that over, 2. Hence why, when we now do the line print A, B, C, we end up getting 2, 3, 2. Now, if you didn't see yesterday's webinar, you may not understand what these commas do, but all these commas do is print a space in between each one. If I were to do pluses over here, it would add all of them up and give us 7, but there should be, so commas just put a space in between them, and hence we get 2, 3, 2. So that should make sense. If you do have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will look at it. But for now, that should kind of make sense. Let's move that back over to the side. I'll bring that up if we need it again. So that should kind of make sense. Now, the entire point of that was to understand that when you do a variable is equal to another variable, it doesn't transfer whatever's inside one variable to the other. It makes a copy and transfers that. A lot of people have that misunderstanding that why is B not null, like why is it the same thing still in B? That's because that's just how programming languages work. When you do a variable is equal to another variable, you make a copy of whatever is inside and you transfer that over. Now, that was just a simple exercise to understand how all that happens. Now let's get into how you do maths in primarily Python for now, but other programming languages may do it differently. If you do want to apply these skills to another programming language, all you have to do is Google how they do it, and it should be fairly similar for the most part. So by doing maths in Python, I mean just how addition, subtraction, how to do all that type of stuff. So first things first, addition, fairly straightforward. Let's say 10 plus 10, you just use a plus sign. If we run this, we should get 20. Okay, there we go, 20. So addition is fairly straightforward, it's the plus sign. So subtraction is the bar sign or the dash. If we run this, we should get 0. There we go, we got 0. Now, those were the simple ones. Now let's get into divide, times, and powers, and all that type of stuff. Now, since you don't have a divide button or a divide key on your keyboard, or at least most people don't, the way you do division in programming languages is by using a slash. So 20/10 is 20 divided by 10. So if we run this, okay, there we go, we got 2. Note that we got 2.0 because when you divide, there's a fairly high chance that you're going to end up getting a decimal number. So Python immediately just makes it into a float. Obviously, if you don't know what a float is, do watch yesterday's webinar. We go through all the data types and what they mean. So Python immediately turns it into a float. Note this is no longer an integer, even though 2.0 is the same as 2. It's a float. It has a decimal point, so that's why you see 2.0. If you want this to go back to an integer, so it just says 2, we'll get into that later. But for now, this is how you divide in Python. Now, multiplication is the same story as divide. There is no times key on regular keyboards. So in order to times in Python, you use star. So 20 times 10 should give us 200 if it runs properly. There we go, 200. So in order to times in a programming language, you use star. So far, this is common in most programming languages, and from now on, this may differ from programming language to programming language. I'm going to change the value so it's a bit more straightforward. Now we're going to look at to the power of. Now, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, in Python, to do 2 to the power 4 or 2 to the power anything, you use 2 stars. So star basically means to the power of. So if we run this, okay, there we go, 16. So 2 to the power 4 is indeed 16. So 2 to the power 1 is 2, to the power 2 is 4, to the power 3 is 8, to the power 4 is 16. As a computer scientist, it's just really useful to know that 2 to the power is all the way to 2 to the 8, I think. Just because binary and that's how computers work. Another thing you're going to need to know, let's switch the numbers around so it's 4 and 2. Another thing that is really useful to know is modulus, and modulus in Python is done by the %sign. So if we run this, you would see that we get 0. Now, at first, you may be confused what modulus is. If you don't know what modulus is, a base example of what modulus is the remainder when you divide the first number by the second. And I don't mean remainder as in 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. I don't mean 0.5. I mean the remainder as in if we do 5 divided by 2, the answer will be run. Run module. There we go, the remainder is 1. So remainder as in how, when I normally teach this subject, it's surprising how a lot of people don't understand it. So let's do a quick example of it over here. So let's say we're doing 2 numbers that don't really divide into each other. Let's say we're doing, my graphics tablet doesn't want to work now. Okay, that's cool. Let's say we want to do 11 divided by 2. If you don't know this method of division, this is long division. So what we mean by modulus is if we were to do this using long division, obviously 2 can't go into 1, so it goes into 2, so it's 5 minus 10, and then we're left with 1. The value that you get over here, that's what modulus gives you, that remainder, not point whatever. It's whatever remainder you get here. If you still don't understand, just Google it, just like mod in Python. There we go, Python. And it will show you how to do it. This actually tells you. There we go. It does use the percentage sign. So just Google it if you don't understand. If you still don't understand what it does. But the most basic explanation I could give is it's the remainder when you divide the first number by the second. Now it's a good point to mention that later on during the webinar, I'm going to try to answer this question or this programming challenge, and I'll be giving you a separate programming challenge to do yourselves. I won't show exactly what the programming challenge is just yet. I'll show it in a second. But for now, let's get into how to get information from the user, and which is probably the main purpose of this webinar. Now, printing information to the user is very useful, as you could see. You could display whatever you want to the user, and there's different ways of doing it. You can format strings, you can format the way you print. printing can get very complicated very quickly. But input is just as important as printing, because there's no point in displaying anything to the user when you can't get any information from them. And in order to use input, you need to understand and know how to use variables. So now that you should have a rough idea on how to use variables, let's get into how we would do that here. Now, in order to use the input method or function in Python, you need to use a variable to store whatever the user enters. So let's say you want to ask the user for their name. We create a variable name, and then we use a key function input that Python has inbuilt into it. So as you can see, you type in input and it changes color to this purplish color. Input also requires you to use brackets. And the way you use the input method is kind of like print, and you use it in the sense that you put quotation marks in it and you display a message to the user, and then that kind of prompts them to enter something in. So I'll show you an example here. So enter your name, bang. If we then let's print whatever the user enters, name. So if we run this from module, cool. So as you can see, it says enter your name. Now notice whenever we run one of these programs, it immediately ends by showing us these 3 red arrows pointing to the right. And as you can see here, it hasn't done that yet. Reason being is Python runs all your code until you hit an input, and Python just waits there, because Python is not going to continue your code until the user enters whatever you want them to enter. In this case, let's type in my name, Amrit, and then you press enter, and as you can see, Python returned back Amrit. So what we did here is we displayed this message, and then because we use the input method or function, Python just waits for a input from the user. Python doesn't check what the user enters, it just waits for an input until the user press enters, and as soon as the user press enters, it continues with the code. So in this case, it just displayed back our name. If you wanted to get fancy, you could always just use more strings. Hi, let's use one I. Hi, Amrit. Run our module. Okay, there we go. Let's enter another name. Let's say your name's Bob, and then the thing returns hi, Bob. Obviously, you can make this as fancy as you want, but this is just a base concept on how to get information from the user. Now, always note, when you do get information from the user in pretty much any programming language, especially Python, whenever you get information from the user, Python treats it as a string. So if we do enter numbers, so if let's say we had age, this is gonna give us an error, and I'll explain why in more detail in a sec. And how to fix the error is another part of today's lesson. But let's say we want the age now. So age is equal to another input, and this time we ask them for their age. So let's say, what is your age? Now also know the reason I leave a space is because the user starts typing as soon as this string ends. If we did, I'll show you here now. If we didn't have this string, it just wouldn't look as professional as a program. So if we run this, first it asks us for a name. So my name's Amrit. Then, as you can see here, it starts asking us to type as soon as that string is finished printing. So if we do enter 20, it's just not as professional as if we did have a space here. Obviously, it doesn't matter if we do or don't do it. It doesn't really affect the program. It's just better for the user to see, and it's just better in general to use. We didn't really do anything with the age, which I completely forgot. So let's print your age in I don't know 5 years will be, and then let's say you wanted to print the age in 5 years. In theory, you should just do age plus 5. In theory, this should work, but I'm going to tell you now it won't, and the reason being, so Amrit, age is 20. Bang, Python gave us an error. Now let's kind of read through this error and understand what it means. Now Python uses a translator called an interpreter. There's two types of translators that programming languages use. And the point of a translator is to make it from high-level code, which is what we type, to low-level code, which is something the computer could understand. Python uses an interpreter, which basically means that it converts the programming, your code line by line. This has its advantages and disadvantages, and its main advantage is whenever Python freaks out, you know exactly what line it freaked out because it's doing it line by line. Compilers, on the other hand, so things like Java, C, all those programming languages mainly use compilers. There are now versions that use interpreters. They mainly use compilers, and they compile the entire code in one go. And when you run that, you don't particularly know where your error is. Now, Python does tell us what line it freaks out because it's using an interpreter. So that's just a bit of background knowledge into how this all works. So it tells us it's on line 7. It freaked out on line 7. The way you figure out your line number is you just highlight on, you just have your cursor on a line, and then you look at the bottom here which line it is. So that's line 6. So obviously Python freaked out on line 7. And the error, it also gives you what the line is, and it tells you what the error is. Can only concatenate str, not int to str. Now what this means is you can only add strings together, not an int with a string. So the entire point of all of this is to show that Python always treats inputs as strings. So I typed in 20. 20 to us humans is a number, but Python is treating it as a string because we used input. Now we're going to get into how to convert from one data type to another, which is also very important. Now, the way you convert from one data type to another, you could do it whenever, but be careful of that statement. Now, I'm going to convert it as soon as the user enters it. Now, this is problematic, and I'll show you why in a second. But the way you convert from one data type to another is by typing what you want to convert it to. So we want to convert it to an int, and you just surround whatever you want to convert into an int with brackets. So now what Python will do is it will take the input, obviously bid mass or bod mass, brackets first. So the most inner bracket works first, so this works first. So the user takes in the input from the user, and then Python will convert it to an int. Now some people may already see the problem with this. Let's run it, assuming that the user is fine. So hi, Amrit, my age is 20. And there we go, your age in 5 years would be 25. Do know if we did use a plus here, this would also give us a error because we're trying to add a int to a string. So Amrit 20, there we go, it gave us the exact same error. I can only concatenate str with int, not string. So if you wanted to convert this back to a string, there we go, you use str. Str is short for string. Let's close that off. Let's run this. Now this should work fairly fine. Amrit 20. There we go, it works perfectly fine again. Now that we're using a plus. So obviously I just showed you two different ways to do the exact same code, just to reiterate. That's the beauty of programming. You could do the same code in 100 different ways, and it will do the exact same thing. Now, I'm going to show you the problem with this, and the main problem is Amrit. Now let's say you ask someone what their age is, and let's say they say 20, like that. Now, technically speaking, they're not wrong. That is their age, but that's not what we want as programmers. We want the number 20, they enter 20 like that, and then Python freaks out because you're trying to convert 20 as in the text to an int, and Python just doesn't know what to do. We don't need to worry too much about that. Until a certain point, we always assume that the user enters the correct information the way we want it. There is ways of validating what the user enters. So for now, don't worry too much about it. But I'm just letting you know that is an issue that you may run into. But at this point, as you're learning programming, we don't worry too much about it. We always assume whatever the user enters is correct, and the user enters it correctly. Okay, let's quick look at the chat. There's nothing in chat. Cool. So let's carry on. So this is a really quick introduction to how to convert from int to string to whatever. Other keywords are bool for boolean, and I'm pretty sure float is, yeah, just float. So if you want to convert from a number to a float, you use that. So instead of int, let's use float, like that. So now kind of think about what, so this is going to kind of test your knowledge from yesterday and to kind of see if you understood. When I run this and I'm going to enter the same details as over here, what do you think, how do you think it will print? So let's run AMRIT 20. Now before I hit 20, kind of think how you think Python's going to print it out. So kind of think to yourselves for a second. 3, 2, 1. There we go. So now, instead of doing just 25, it did 25.0 because obviously floats is how we define decimals in programming languages. Now, since we converted it to a float, you can still do mathematical operations just the same, but Python still treats it as a float even though 25.0 is the same as 25. It will keep it as a decimal because we changed it to type float. Cool. I think that's everything on my list here. Variables, converting, calculations. Yeah, so that's everything I kind of needed to go over fairly quickly on my list here. Now we have one of two options. I have two exercises here. Here's the second one. I am gonna let's see. I could either give both of them as challenges, or I could do one as an example and give the other one as a challenge. So let's see, which one's the harder one? I think this one's pretty easy. Yeah, this one's pretty easy. I'll give this one as a challenge. Extra 10%. Yeah, cool. So this, I'm gonna walk you through how I do a question like this. And then at the end of, we have 10-ish minutes anyway. So at the end of today's session, I'll give you a challenge to do, and you could either use roughly what I did to help you, or you could do it on your own and just try to tackle the challenge head on. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how I break down, how if I were given this challenge, how I break it down, and how you should kind of break it down too. So let's read through it quickly. So a student loan company is providing an online calculator for students to work out how much they owe. They first input how much they are owed at the start of the year, then how much they are paid at they pay off that year. You may assume that these whole numbers these are in whole numbers of pounds. So the entire reason that line is there, you may assume that they're whole numbers, is because this program was originally for Java. I've changed it up, as you can see. I kind of use a white pen and rub out a lot of it, so it's suitable for Python. Yeah, so that was originally for Java, because in other programming languages you have to specify what type your variables are. So in other programming languages you have to do int age is equal to 20, and now age as a variable can only store integers within it. Python, on the other hand, has dynamic variables, so age could be a string, an int, a float, a boolean. It makes programming easy in Python, but it also makes your programs easier to break. So that's the reason, essentially, why that line is there. Don't worry too much about it. So basically, they enter how much they owe at the start of the year, then how much they have paid off that year. It then adds 6.3% interest to the total at the end of the year and prints out a new total. The final should be given to 2 decimal places, so it needs to be rounded. Fair enough. This should be a fairly straightforward. Program. So let's start off. So I normally always would give a an example of the program running. So in this example, this is roughly how the program should lay out. If your program looks exactly like this, that's amazing, well done. If it doesn't, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter. I'm gonna make it looking exactly like this. So the first thing we need to do is ask, sometimes you could just understand what the program is just by looking at the example. Sometimes you have to read carefully what the program does in the description. I'm just gonna, so essentially first, I always look at what information do we need from the user. Well, the information we need from the user is the loan at the start of the year and how much they paid off. So the loan at the start of the year was £1,000 and they paid off £5. And then we calculate the new percentage because it adds 6.3%, and then it displays that. Cool, so let's start doing that. So the first thing we need is the loan at the start of the year. So just a quick tip in programming, I won't say it's industry standard, but it's a good practice to name your variables like this. So if your variables, if you want to name your variables more than one word, you can't do this. So loan at start, you can't do that. You can't have spaces in your variables. So what programmers tend to do is the first word starts with a lowercase first letter, and then every word after that has a first capital letter. So loan at start would be how a lot of programmers name their variables. And it's a really good practice to label your variables with what you intend to use them for. That way, if someone else looks at your code, it doesn't really confuse them into what's going on and how, what your program should be doing. I am looking at chat, so if anyone does have any questions, do let me know. Cool. So loan at start. And then what we do is we want the loan at the start of the year from the user. Now, as I said earlier, we're going to always assume that the user enters the correct values. We're not going to assume that user enters 1,000 in letters. For now, later on, we will go over validation and how to validate what the user is entering. So first, we're going to type in loan at start, and we're going to immediately convert that to an integer, so it doesn't, so we don't need to do anything with it later on. So it's going to be an int, and then we use the input method to get the information from the user. And in this case, we could just display amount of loan at start of the year. There we go. We have a space just so it looks all pretty. That's the first line done. That's going to do exactly that. I'll run it in a sec, but it's going to do exactly that. Next line is getting how much information, getting how much they have paid off in that year. So in this case, they've paid off £5. Actually, no, I won't do that. Generally, copy pasting isn't bad, but it does get rid of the practice. So I'm just going to write down. I'm just going to write from scratch. So paid off is equal to, let's immediately convert it to an int, and then input, and in the brackets, let's do exactly what it says there. Amount paid off this year. Space. Cool. So that's the first two lines done. Now we need to do the third line, and that's displaying how much they have left. So you can reuse the same variables. For now, I'm just going to create a new variable, and the name, I'm going to call it amount due, and that's going to be equal to loan at start minus amount due. Oops, I've accidentally put a space. Amount due. Oh wait, no, not amount due. Sorry. Paid off. I was looking elsewhere. Paid off. Cool. So far, amount due is going to be equal to the loan at the start minus paid off. Now, do keep in mind the spelling of these variables needs to be exactly the same. Python is a case-sensitive language, so if we accidentally did this, Python would give you an error because these two variables don't match, and it just says, well, I don't know what this variable is. So do keep in mind, if you do get an error and you don't understand why, just make sure your spelling is always consistent in your code. So that's amount due is equal to loan at start minus paid off. Now we have to add the 6.3% that the program is telling us. Now, if you don't know how to do that, that's pretty straightforward. So it's going to be amount due. Whoops, I keep putting space. Due is equal to 6.3% of that. So essentially, it's going to be amount due times 1.063. If you don't understand why I've done that, it's just maths. The basic explanation is if you want to increase something by a certain percent, divide your percentage by 100 and then add 1 to it, and then times it with whatever you want to increase, and it will be golden. Now also note you can use a variable name within itself. So like over here we've done amount due. Amount due is equal to amount due times 1.063. All this is doing is taking the original value, so the value after this line is executed, timesing it by 1.063, and then putting it within here. So it's almost safe to assume that this part of the equal sign will be executed before this part, kind of technically speaking. So it will execute this first and then store the value within amount due. So that should be it. I haven't yet done the rounding part. We'll get into that in a second. So let's just do the final line. So in this case, we're just printing information to the user. We're not wanting to get anything back. So the new amount owed is in pounds, and then whatever the new amount is. In this case, let's just do comma and then amount due. So this is technically our first program that actually takes in some values, processes them, and processes them and displays information back. Cool. So amount loan at the start. Let's use the exact same values as in the example. So 1,000. Amount paid off 5. And there we go. The new amount is 1057.6. Well, we still need a round. We'll get into that in a sec. But it's the exact same thing if we have rounded it. So in order to round in any programming language, if you don't know how to do it, the best way to do it is just Google it. So round in Python, just Google what you want to do, and then you'll find something like this. So Python round function. So Python does have its own round function. And you can quickly read about it. So round, whatever you want to round, and to number of decimal points. Cool, so that's fairly straightforward. So the point of that is just showing you, you could always Google whatever you want if you want to find out how to do something. So now it depends where we want to round it. So let's just say we want to round it here. So round this. So round does turn purple, which means it's a Python function. And let's just round it there. So we want to round this to 2 decimal places. So if we bring this back, what this is saying is separate everything by commas. And the first thing is what you want to round, and the second thing is to how many decimal places. So let's rerun this program. Let's see if it works. So run module. Okay. Let's bring the image back up. Just so we could confirm it works. So 1005. There we go. 1057.68. Now note that this didn't round up to 69 because what the round function does do is it just cuts off the excess information. Round, and the second argument is optional. It defaults to 0, not specified in such cases. Nearest integer. Second argument is present. Around to the return type will be a flow. Number after the decimal place given is greater equal to 5, then plus 1 over the 5 value. So for some reason it didn't work for whatever reason. These are just some example codes that you could look at. So at this point, the entire idea is playing around with the functions to see to make it work exactly as intended. We could also technically round it over there. Let's see if this runs differently. Okay. So 1005. Oh, I didn't specify to how many decimal places. So 2. Let's run this again. So it did round in this scenario, so I'm not sure why it didn't round in that scenario. 100568. So it still rounded to 68. Not entirely sure why. Maybe if it's equal to 5, it doesn't round. Let's try the other example. So the other example, run module. Let's open up the image. So if the other example works, should be fine. 662, so that works perfectly fine. Now, I'm not entirely sure why it doesn't round when it's 0.5, but when it's 0.6, it does round up. I will probably play around with this and let you know in the next webinar, which is tomorrow. We are all out of time for today. So that being said, I'm going to be showing you the challenge for today, which is this lovely program. So have a read, take a screenshot. This will be a video afterwards on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, just hit the pause button, take a read, and try doing that yourself. I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember off the top. Yeah, it does. You do need to round down. So do try giving this a go. Now rounding down may be a little bit more difficult, and you may not want to use the round function because the round function will round up when it needs to. So that being said, there is a different way you are kind of expected to do this. Genuinely speaking, there's a different way you are expected to do this. The way I'll quickly show you the way the answer was from where I got these questions. So the way you were expected to do this one was whenever you get your thing, times it by 100, so times it by 100, and then divide it by, no, and then at this point we round, and then we divide by 100. So divide by 100. So all we did here is we took whatever the value was, we times it by 100, so move everything over 2 places to the left. Round it, so just chop off everything after the decimal point. Round it or just turn it to an int. Int will also just cut it off. And then divide by 100, so bring back whatever values you did. So if we run this, they should run fine-ish, I guess. It will still give us 0.8, I think. So 1005. Yeah, it still works the exact same, but instead of it still gives us 0.68 and not 0.69. So you can look into this, try figuring it out yourself. That being said, the challenge for today is up on the screen now. So round down if you want to round down, this is probably the way you kind of want to do it. Try understanding this. I will show you my version of this code in tomorrow's webinar. It should be fairly straightforward. It shouldn't take that long at all. And yes, so if you have any questions, you could post it in chat now. Otherwise, I will see you in tomorrow's webinar. So do take a second to kind of screenshot this. It's not compulsory to do. The only way you're going to get better at programming is by practice. So do take a screenshot if you want. I'll give it another minute or so, and then I'll stop the recording. And yep, it was recording, thank God. I'll stop the recording, and the session would be over. So take another second to kind of just screenshot it. I don't see any questions in chat, so thank you everyone so much for watching. Do watch this live if you are watching it on YouTube. It's just a much better way for you to ask me questions. I tend to answer pretty much any question that does pop up. So yes, so thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will see you in tomorrow's webinar, where we will be answering. I'll give you my version of the code to this, just so you, if you were stuck, you could see how I did it. We'll be going through it, and we'll be improving upon what we know in Python and learning more learning a bit more coding. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.